Welcome back, everybody. I'm Sean LaFlock. I'm with Scotty Hagnes. This is Conversations, Fitness, Wellness, and Longevity. Scotty, how's everything going, man?
Hey, going pretty good here.
Cool.
Portland rain has returned as of
Aha.
today, this morning, which
Yeah.
I'm disappointed because it's going to affect my ride here shortly.
Ah.
But
Well, I can feel that. I feel your pain because now we're in the midst of hurricane season, so we're just on and off thunderstorms, and I think we probably got like 4 or 5 inches of rain in the last about 48 hours. So
ooh,
it's been rough. 4 to 8, four to
yeah,
five might be. I mean, we had some significant flooding around here. We had
yeah, pretty
a tropical
intense.
storm. A tropical storm is coming through the Gulf, and then that just crushes you with some residual stuff
Yeah,
that comes away. But
dumps it.
exactly. But
Yeah.
overall, though, you can't complain too much because at least the temperature is down a little bit, so you get a little bit of reprieve from the oppressive heat that is South Florida. But um,
Hmm.
I thought I'd start today, Scott, about a little bit about the follow up from your ride. Last week we talked a little bit about how the ride went and the lead up to it, and then basically like the 24 hours afterward. Now that all is said and done, what are some of the things that you have seen so far? How your body's reacted? What have you been doing in terms of your training? And how have you been objectively or have you been testing this and seeing the effects that have been going on?
Yeah, interestingly, I felt pretty good, really, this day after. I think we talked Wednesday, which was just one day post ride, and I tested with a number of metrics. The Omega Wave had my adaptive reserves, or my ability to adapt productively to any form of exercise, was pretty significantly depressed that morning, and stress on the cardiac system was high, and I was real parasympathetic compared to normal. The adaptive reserves came back the next day, but stress on the cardiac system, and I stayed parasympathetic, like much more so than normal at any time during the year. For
Mm.
a full, it wasn't until Monday, no, Tuesday morning, yesterday, was the first day that everything returned normal. I was back to
Oh
balance,
wow.
and the stress was, the tension between the two parts of the nervous system was back to normal.
Wow.
So,
So almost took you basically a full week to get back to kind of a
uh,
steady state.
Yeah, yep, absolutely, yeah, full week. And
Yeah.
it was definitely a different pattern than I've seen all year long, or even during some past rides. Like last year's ride, which was one day at about 7.5 hours, didn't
Hmm.
barely disrupt much more than a hard day in the gym would have.
Yep.
Two years ago, I did a 9+ hour session, which was pretty grueling, and I was pretty near exhaustion at the end. And that took, I think, 5 full days to get out of the funk. But that's the only time I've seen this sort of a pattern
Oh wow.
in like 3+ years of constant daily testing.
So knowing day by day that you have some HRV scores and some omega wave test scores that are obviously parasympathetic and your nervous system is a bit out of whack. What are some things that you do to maybe stabilize that or mitigate the I guess the blowback or the backlash from some of those symptoms?
Yeah, so there's a number of things you can do. Contrast showers can be drive some sympathetic response. I did
Mm-hmm.
that a little bit. The other thing I did was just light, short aerobic sessions. So
Mm-hmm.
just basically went out for skill sessions on the bike. I only took one day, Wednesday. The first day was the only day I took actually off. I went out and rode Tuesday, not long, 20 some minutes. The next thing, the next day, did some dynamic mobility work those days.
Mm-hmm.
Rode a little more over the weekend, then this week I started riding a little longer Monday, a little longer Tuesday, and then I did my first strength workout Tuesday because my numbers were finally back. So,
Yep.
and just that was more of an introductory exploratory thing,
Mm-hmm.
getting some metrics on what I was going to be doing for my straight arm strength,
Mm.
planche training, things like that, and then doing a little bit of work. I'm going to work sumo deadlifts in the kind of just work some different lifts and some variety from things that I've uh, done before.
Yeah, maybe plateaued before in certain types of pull, and then maybe work up a different type and see how that affects. That sounds pretty
Yeah.
cool. So we I think we last week we had talked a little bit about where you wanted to go with your training and that kind of stuff. But any kind of aha moments or moments of clarity since this last week and your ride that you've done, maybe on the psychological side for you?
Well, yeah, that's interesting. I have looking at the psychology of skills, because now everything I'm really focusing on is highly skill based.
Mm-hmm.
And mindset is such a huge piece. The belief you can or can't do something, or really just this is difficult. So you treat it as difficult, it becomes
Mm-hmm.
harder. Whereas if you can go in treating it as this is not hard, I have done it before, or maybe you haven't done it, but you know it's possible. Um, it really changes. So I've actually had some really good rides this week,
Yep.
just hitting some things and changing mindset around it. So the
Yeah.
mind is very powerful.
Absolutely. I actually saw a video of Dr. I think it's Dr. Nicholas Romanov. He's the guy who discovered pose running. He's written about it before. I've actually taken the pose running course with him. And he had a video where he took runners and he blindfolded them and he started running with them holding their hand. And then he ran them uphill and he had a heart rate monitor attached to them. When they ran up the hill, the first time, okay, cool. And, their heart rate goes up, higher 160s, whatever. He throws the blindfold on them, grabs their hand and starts running around with them and throws them, runs up the hill. And when you don't see it, you just think you're running. There's no necessarily change when you're running uphill versus running flat. You're just, especially if you're running with good technique, you're just not going as fast because now you're overcoming gravity with every step, and their heart rate stayed the same as if they were running on flat ground. So it really does beg the question, what is causing the response through your nervous system? And I do believe that what we input here and what we input here has an enormous effect on what our actual the response from your body will be through your nervous system, through your heart rate, through your just the ability for your body to regulate what's going on. I know another story where there was a man who was trapped in a cable car back in like the early 1800s, and he thought that he was stuck in the freezer car. So he had written, and he had like a journal or something like that. He's like, "This is my last few hours on Earth. I want to thank everybody." But he wrote his dying words, and they open up the car. He's dead, and it was never on.
Oh man.
He completely psychologically screwed
Yeah.
himself and just basically killed himself. So it's an amazing thing what mindset can do, and I completely wholeheartedly agree with that, Scott.
Yeah. And I think we touched on a little bit last week when I was on the 4,000 foot climb, which,
Mm-hmm.
well, it was never horrible. It was definitely, I could feel the effort. And then there was at one point I was trying to compute the time, what time it was when I started the ride, how far I was in. I saw a milepost. I'm trying to
Mm-hmm.
guesstimate when I'm going to be back. So I'm doing all this mental arithmetic in my head while climbing.
Yep.
And after a while, I realized I drifted back to what I was doing. I was like,
Yeah.
I've gone a long way and I didn't feel any fatigue
Yeah.
accumulating like I had been before. And so,
Yeah, it's amazing what happens when your mind kind of travels a little bit, and it also kind of just saying that, like, maybe that's part of the whole thing. Maybe it's very hard for the mind to kind of stay tackling this task, and then you kind of got to drift away for a second, and then all of a sudden your body's like, all right, thank you. My mind can shut off for a little bit, so my body can do what it's supposed to do, instead of having that hindrance of your brain kind of being in the way, maybe.
it's kind of micromanaging the whole process when it doesn't
Yeah.
necessarily need to.
Yeah, instead of just letting go and just being like, all right, yeah, I know I can do this. I put in the work. I put in the time. I know I can, tackle this task ahead of me. So that's pretty
Mm-hmm.
cool. And like I said before, as um, the training comes back and you have some of the time to, make sense of some things, you're definitely going to get some more of those little rewards here and there while you're on your rides or while you're in the weight room or whatever it might be. So that's a pretty
Mm-hmm.
darn cool thing that you've done there, Scott. Um, yeah.
Oh yeah, I was gonna say I will later this week. I'll go hit my first actual ride. Not long, probably like an hour.
Mm-hmm.
But I know last year we after the ride we switched to doing tempo runs for some
Yep.
aerobic development. So I thought, well, I'll ride my bike to the track, and then I'll be warmed up, and then I can do a running specific warm up, do my tempo runs, ride back to cool down. Sweet, sounds awesome, And it was about 1 week after the ride, and as I was riding to the track, I was like, damn, this is difficult. And it was just a flat ground ride.
No.
So clearly that modality, once I got running, I felt great. So it's clearly very specific to the
Yeah.
ride because going and coming was so. I'm waiting a little longer this year, but I'm curious to see if
Um,
I'll report next week on how that that goes.
Please do. That's absolutely interesting, fascinating to me, actually. So I work with a client, but he also does some functional diagnostic stuff. And he had turned me on to this because he started doing it. He's younger. He's been, he's had issues with some digestive issues, but mostly like wasting issues. So he's a type of person who can put back 4,000 calories, 5,000 calories in a day, never gain an ounce of weight. And we've been working together for a while now. I kind of take care of his training protocols, and I put him in the direction of some of his nutritional protocols and stuff like that. But he's kind of gone beyond what even I have been doing. And he started doing some functional diagnostic nutrition stuff, and they recommended an MRT test, a mediator release test. And ever since he started doing that, he started following a particular way of eating. So he excluded a bunch of different foods. And then the foods that the test came back as the least sensitive, he started eating those foods only. And he's seen some amazing gains in not only body composition, but hair regrowth. His skin quality cleared up. And this is a person who was on Accutane when he was younger. Basically follows a paleo diet and really had problems. So he showed me what his sensitivities were. Things like hazelnuts. I think whey was no good, and a bunch of different meats other than like lamb were pretty much hands off. So,
Wow.
then when he changed it, obviously the reason why you would do this is because it allows your gut to heal and to be optimal so that when you do eat, you're actually absorbing the food. And that's something that I've always kind of put out in my mind that, like, okay, if you eat the food, you're going to use the food. But if you poke holes in your gas tank or in the engine, and then you go ahead and flood it with fuel and you're not actually absorbing it, you're really not even doing anything.
Yeah.
So, the mediator release test, it's a blood test. You send it off to a lab. They send it to you back. They give you a little kind of like spreadsheet of a bunch of different, the 150 foods that they test. They give you which foods are the most reactive versus the least reactive. In the first week, you stay to the least reactive foods, and then you can start adding more of the green foods in. But they pretty much say stay away from the more reactive foods for a prolonged amount of time. But by the end of this, you can retest, and then you can start reincorporating some of those other foods, because nothing should technically be disastrous in terms of your immune system. It's just so we're so hyperactive in our immune system, leaky
Mm-hmm.
gut, gap junctions, or just your gut is crushed. So when you are in optimal health, you should be able to tinker around with some of the other foods and not have too much of a reaction from it, instead of just being completely laid up for 2 days, or have your hair fall out or something like
Yeah.
that. So basically, I carry around this little card here with me. I've been doing this for the last 3 days. My biggest four that I got to stay away from are lemon, mushroom, rye, and wheat. I've always tried to stay away from bread products and stuff like that. So those weren't too crazy for me, though I'm a little bit more conscious of keeping that clean. But the lemon is in a lot of like garnishes and dressings and that kind of food. Some of the other ones,
Mm-hmm.
just to give you an idea, cranberry, which again, that's in a lot of different bars and foods and stuff.
Yeah.
Some dyes, red dye number 3 and red dye number 40. So just kind of staying away from some of the Gatorade type stuff, because I know that they're going to have that. So instead of having Gatorade, I take some fruit juice and I'll just dilute it a little bit and throw a little pinch of salt in there. And I've been doing that for the last week.
Mm-hmm.
Oats, millet, lentils. Another one is ibuprofen, which I've taken every once in a while. When I'm extremely, you have a nagging injury or something like that. So I'll
Mm-hmm.
keep that out. Soybeans is another one. And I would think soy lecithin is another one to keep out.
Yeah.
The last two that were eye-opening to me was sunflower, which sneaks into a lot of different stuff,
Mm-hmm.
and tea. And I
Tea.
love tea.
Oh no.
Yeah, I
A
know.
specific form of tea, or
It
what?
just
Because
says
there's so many
tea.
things.
I know.
Is
It
it
just
the
says
tannins? I wonder. That's interesting.
you know what? I just hope that after the 6 week, or after about 6 months, and I retest and it re-updates your foods. So
Yeah.
eventually this list is going to shrink and shrink and shrink. And I hope that eventually kind of comes off because I do enjoy tea, but I can do it for now if I'm going to see some substantial health benefits from it. But I'll keep playing with this. I've taken some before pictures. I'm kind of taking a food journal and kind of seeing what's not. I'll tell you the biggest thing so far. So yesterday was my second day doing it. It was about 12 to 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and I got a tremendous headache,
Oh.
like a detox headache.
Yeah.
Almost like when you first went strict paleo, and all of a sudden you're kind of detoxing off sugar or whatever it might
Yeah.
be, and it's just right here, and you just lay down and take a nap like for the first time in forever, and you're just like, what just happened?
Oh man,
But
that's
I was
interesting.
definitely probably detoxing from sugar, refined sugar, just because I'm like, oh, whatever, it's got sugar in it, or it's, it's cookies or whatever. But just taking that out of my diet, I just didn't realize how reliant I am to some of that stuff. So, I'm going to tinker around with this for probably the next month or so, 6 weeks. A couple of the cool things is that I didn't have any sensitivity to dairy. So they test, so I have mine here. They have American cheese, cheddar cheese, cottage cheese, yogurt, whey, cow's milk, and goat's milk, and none of them were reactive. All of them were green. And I've stayed away from dairy because I thought it was a big reaction. It had a big reaction for me. But then I come to think of it, you have to do it in isolation. So that means you have to get a pure source of like cheese or milk, whatever it might be, and it can't have additives or anything like that, or any stabilizers. And whenever you go to like
Hmm.
you go get a burger somewhere, you're rarely having it just as a burger. So you're probably having a bun. And then the other thing is that the cheese that they put on there is probably not just 100% milk and cheese. It's probably got some kind of, soy
Yeah.
lecithin or something in it. So that could be what's causing those reactions. So I
Hmm.
got some New Zealand like cheddar cheese, like grass-fed cheddar cheese, and I've been putting it on my foods, and I haven't had any reaction yet. Some of that might be psychological, but I know in the past when I've had it, I'm like, oh, I'm just gonna have some cheese. I'll like have itching like an hour later and that kind of stuff, but I haven't had any reaction thus far adding cheese into my diet. I mean, again, I'm gonna keep playing around with it and trying to be as aware as possible, but I think it's some pretty cool noticings.
Yeah, absolutely. That's pretty cool.
Yeah. Now, the difference between this and the IgG, because I've seen IgG before, and the IgG may not be show up when everything is there because you may not actually have that food in your system causing a reaction at the time. So you might not
Right.
be
If you've not eaten it for a long time, even though
exactly.
you might be reactive to it, it wouldn't show up.
That's exactly right. Whereas this, they're literally taking your immune cells, they put it through a system where they subject that food, and it should cause a reaction if there is a reaction, and they're able to kind of show how much of a reaction that actually has. So I think it's pretty cool. Again, the only reason I would do it is because I knew someone did it and they had a pretty good response from it. Now that I've kind of looked in the research a little bit, they've had some peer reviewed stuff published in journals, and they've shown some really good results. In terms of people being able to find what actually is reactive in their system. And I think we had spoken about, Scotty, a little while ago, putting together the pieces of the paleo diet. And I think this is probably one of those things where if you're not getting that resolution of symptoms, it might be something to look into.
Hmm. Yeah. Yes, that was interesting going back to your client that did this in the first place, and he was reactive to a lot of the standard meats.
Mm.
So how did he then end up reworking? Did he end up trending toward a semi-vegetarian type of a approach then, or was there enough meat left that he was doing it that way, or what? How did that go?
Good question. So he stuck mostly to lamb because chicken and beef was no good for him. So he
Hmm.
stuck mostly to lamb. The other thing was he, instead of doing the dairy, he did, so he would, he's been doing whey forever, whether it was Progenics or whatever other kind of high quality whey product was. He
Hmm.
switched it to pea, a pea and
Pea
rice
and like
blend,
rice. Uh-huh.
rice and pea blend.
Yeah.
And, he did that. And that didn't, I'm telling you, like, this is a person who's 20 something years old and still has like, some acne going on, and he
Mhm.
doesn't have any of that anymore. So, I definitely think that there's so many different sources of people or scientists and doctors who've put out, publications and written books on this topic. One of them is like, metabolic typing diet, like should you eat meat,
Hmm.
should you not eat meat? I think this is a way that actually could bring a lot of those pieces together because they all could be true and they all could be false. It's just matters about the person. I think putting together the prescription for that person in particular is what I think optimally would be done, and to have a test that actually shows that would be really really helpful, and I think
Hmm.
that's kind of what's going on now with this.
Yeah, I've got a couple of clients that have just had some kind of problematic blood work, just standard labs, cholesterol levels and ratios and
Mm,
apoprotein B, bad stuff there, potentially glucose and triglycerides and things. And, fixing the training didn't make
yep.
any change. On a much higher carb, lower fat diet, didn't look any different than when they were low carb and high fat. And I actually fall into this camp too, that, my blood on my more recent, high carb doesn't look any different than it looked when I was extremely low carb by and
Mm-hmm.
large. The only difference is before I messed with my nutrition at all, it was not like that at all. So back in the bodybuilding diet days and the
Mm-hmm.
days where I'm just eating, how every other 20 something year old
Yep.
BMXer ate, actually everything was quite good.
Mm,
So anyway, a couple of these clients I have work with a naturopath here in town, and he
yep.
has trended a little more away from paleo, also into carbs, but really now into fairly low protein, and most of it coming from non-animal sources,
Yep.
especially for people that present with this particular type of blood work.
Mm,
So I have just kind of trended that way a little bit myself. Well, I definitely still eat meat. I will skip it at meals and have lentils and things like that. But
yep.
these clients that have done it more strictly and under his testing and guidance, they're like, they were very skeptical going in, being big,
Mm,
consumers of meat and whatnot. They're like, man, I actually feel the best I've felt in a long time, and my digestion is better than it's been in years.
yep.
And finally favorable shifts in blood work. So
Yeah.
and so this comes back kind of, I think, Wolcott and the metabolic typing diet, or, there is a huge amount of individuality, because that may work for those people, or maybe even for me, that doesn't mean it's everyone should do this. There are people that maybe need the exact opposite, but
Yeah.
if
Yeah.
you don't test, you wouldn't really know.
Absolutely. And I think, one of the big things about the paleo diet that works for a lot of people is um, the ability for people to actually be, diligent and actually follow the diet, like have compliance. So like,
Mm.
if you're like, okay, you can have bacon, you can have meat, you can have, sweet potatoes and potatoes, go ahead. Most people are like, all right, cool. That's not too much of a shift for me. But the problem is the people who don't get the results that they need from that because they are completely just smashed to their gut aren't going to actually see the results that a lot of other people might see from a basic paleo diet, because most people overconsume grains anyway. So they're like, okay, you're going to have a strict drastic reduction in calorie intake. You're going to have some quality fats most likely because you kind of changed X, Y, and Z. So you're not having refined vegetable oils and stuff like that. So that knocks out like 80% of the game. That next level of people are those who are looking for significant changes in body composition or performance, and then there's people who have disease, whether it's some kind of metabolic or some kind of autoimmune condition. And I think again, this is where that next level of testing is. I wouldn't jump to this right in the beginning. I would say, all
Right.
right, let's clean up your diet, let's do that thing, and let's see where it goes. Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
Okay, then we go to the next level. Then we go to the next level, and unless you're really, and I've heard this a bunch of times before from a lot of people, is unless you're prepared to go all the way down the rabbit hole, don't even bother starting testing.
Yeah. Most people don't have the big rocks dealt with. They're not getting
Yeah.
enough sleep. They're not eating on any kind of consistent schedule. They're not eating good food or, reasonable amounts one way or the
Mm,
other. And if you're not doing those basic things, I mean, they're looking for all the minor details is just
yeah.
a waste of time and energy.
Yeah. People always ask me, like, they're not even eating clean or they don't sleep or anything like that. Like, what supplements do you take? I'm like, I don't take any supplements, and neither should you. And they're like,
Mm-hmm.
well, I have this. What do I can't get up and make breakfast in the morning because, I blah, blah, blah. I'm like, what protein should I take? I'm like, you really can't get up 5 minutes early and prepare breakfast. Like, you can't just open up some
Yeah.
some sliced meat and having some nuts and just walking out the door with that. I'm like, well, that's a whole different issue. Like, but when
Yeah.
you see people who are like ready, willing to do blood work and stuff like that, they're like, listen, I know this stuff. Let's go the next level and let's give this a try. Myself and my fiance did it together, and we did it together so we can be compliant together a little bit. Hers is significantly different. Her top four are garlic, ginger, barley, and corn. And
Yeah, garlic is another one I wanted to mention. That yeah, that was the other one that I see on the
yeah,
fairly often.
yeah. Um,
Interesting.
Yeah, and again, you're like, oh well, that's not too bad. But then when you start to like delve in some stuff that you don't prepare foods yourself, you notice that they're seasoned in everything.
Oh
Garlic
yeah,
and ginger are almost in everything.
yeah,
Yeah, if you want it to
yeah.
taste good, that is.
Exactly. Well, and you can see why people that maybe eat out a lot or eat pre-made things a lot, even if it's relatively healthy or high quality, may
Yeah,
still be suffering with a lot of reactions to the food they're eating because
yeah,
you're always going to find these various things in everything for flavor. It's
yep.
only if you're cooking fairly extremely simple meals yourself that you might possibly, be avoiding them if you didn't know.
Yeah, and it's funny now that I'm kind of cooking a little bit more myself and being a little bit more mindful, not eating out as much, and like the snacking. I'm like, all right, I'm not going to eat the snacks because they have some of the stuff in it. You all of a sudden start to realize you're like, wow, like this becomes so much more of a basic diet and kind of back to where you were in the beginning of like, all right, I'm going to eat like, sensible meals and I'm going to cook for myself. And all of a sudden you feel better. Like you have that 48 hours of the tremendous, sugar headache or detox headache. And then after that, you're like, oh, I started feeling better again. So it's like you kind of slip off the rails a little bit and you kind of allow life to happen and you enjoy yourself. And then, every once in a while, you're like, hey, let's kind of like see what this feels like and where this goes. And maybe you pick something up or a couple things up and then you kind of move on. And then it just becomes second nature. So it's like that first 2 weeks of being systematic about it, and then it kind of comes second nature, and then you're like, all right, I'm just going to stay away from that, or I'm going to cook an extra meal every day, or whatever it might be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it'd be interesting to watch, kind of see how your sleep quality, if any change there or what you see
Yeah,
going through this phase.
yeah, I'm 100%, and for me, I've always had just so obviously people know I've always had some kind of sleep issues or disturbances. I've had that 3 o'clock in the morning cortisol dump. And I've tried to figure out what that might be from. And there's a couple things that actually I was talking to my buddy Ian about was the responsive bacteria eating later in the day. So say if you eat, during the light hours versus eating later. So if you eat 8:30, 9 o'clock, you might have a complete different response to food based upon the fact that your bacteria are now woken up because it's nighttime and you're going to have a different reaction to that food. So if you're now having to digest during a time where you're supposed to be sleeping, you could have a reaction and then a cortisol spike from that, and then end up being woken up at 3 o'clock in the morning. So there's so many variables to this little
Yeah,
thing that it's just like, all right, let's just focus on one thing. We'll do it for 6 weeks, then we'll reassess, and then we'll go from there.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So we will see how this goes, but I'm very happy eating cheese again.
Nice,
Yeah.
cool.
Cool. All right.
Yeah, I
So,
may have to do one of those someday.
yeah, Scott, you got a lot on your plate, man. So one thing at a
Yeah,
time.
I've had nearly every kind of lab except I have not had any form of a food sensitivity lab. Is about the only thing I haven't run at some point in my life.
Well, I'll go through it, Scott. If I have a significant change, I'll recommend it to you. If I don't, I
Okay.
will just let you know not to waste your
Yeah,
money.
yeah. Well, I'm not really feeling anything that symptoms or any digestive issues that I can sort out anyway. So
Well,
I think things are
lucky you,
going
Scott.
okay.
All right, brother. So I think
All
that's
right.
probably good for today. We're about that half hour mark. I'm Sean LaFlock. You can reach me at Sean@CrossFitDelraryBeach.com.
And I'm Scott. You can reach me at Scott@CrossFitPortland.com. Scott Hagness, that is. I always just say my first name.
Well, what is it, Scott?
Yeah. What is it?
Okay.
Hagness.
Scott Hagness. Beautiful. All right, Scotty. Thank you very much, buddy.
All
I'll
right,
see you
Sean.
next
Take
week.
care.
Bye.